My name is Willy Bolander. I study influence, persuasion, and leadership in selling and sales management, and I teach people how to sell. In this podcast, we'll talk to some of the world's top sales leaders and see what we can learn from them. Welcome to the Sales Lab. This episode of the Sales Lab is brought to you by the 2020 International Collegiate Sales Competition, a sales recruiting event happening November 11th through 14th in sunny Orlando, Florida. Look, we all know that recruiting top talent is a persistent challenge for sales organizations. The mission of the ICSC is to enhance the selling profession by encouraging the development of the critical sales skills needed by today's collegiate sales graduates in a fun and competitive environment, and to provide a venue where companies can meet the nation's top collegiate sales talent in one place. This year, the ICSC will be attended by over 500 sales-focused college students from over 90 universities who come to compete in either a sales role-play competition, a sales management case competition, or both. Will your organization be there to hire the best of the best from around the country? Visit www.icsc-fsu.org. That's ICSC as in International Collegiate Sales Competition, FSU, as in Florida State University.org, for more information on how you can get involved. Don't let these great recruits go to your competitors. Today's episode, we're going to be talking with Mark Kramer. Mark Kramer's a very interesting gentleman. He has been the CEO and president of a couple of different wholesale distribution companies. He's former chairman of the National Association of Wholesale Distributors, and he's a retired lieutenant colonel from the U.S. Marines. Always has something interesting to say, so I'm really glad we got this material recorded. In this episode, we'll talk a little bit about how the military prepares you for professional business life, how everyone in the organization is a salesperson, or as Mark says it, everyone carries a rifle. A little bit about servant leadership versus sort of authoritarian leadership, and the importance of being a good follower before you try to be a leader. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks a lot. Before we get into questions, what are some of the things that you wanted to communicate being here anyway?
Yeah, and I've said to many classes over the 8 years that I've been here at Florida State, you are all to be congratulated for being in this room. Because aside from the curriculum that you study, what I've observed over the last 8 years is that you learn 3 critical life skills because you're studying sales, okay? Aside from the curriculum. That first critical skill is you learn to start every encounter by trying to understand the other party, understand what their needs are, understand where the gaps are, where the point of pain is, where the circumstances allow you to introduce solutions later on, but you start by understanding the other party. That's a critical skill which is lost in many professions today. The second critical thing that you learn is how to articulate a value proposition. And when you think about it, any success you're ever going to have, no matter what your career is, no matter where you go, any success you're going to have is because somebody in their own enlightened self-interest agrees voluntarily to accept what you're saying. And that process is made enormously easier because you know, whether it's in writing or verbally or through any other platform, social media, wherever, you know how to articulate the value, the benefit, not just the features, but the benefit of your product or service. And learning how to do that is a critical life skill. And the third thing that is so apparent in these classrooms is the fact that when you start studying sales, you start understanding and looking at the behavioral traits, the personal characteristics, the personality traits that allow you to form relationships and become trusted. And nothing you ever try to do in life is going to be as successful as it could be until the other party trusts you. That's not really a dramatic statement. If you think about it, how long do you hang around with people you don't trust? But how do you get other people to trust you? You don't do it through power or through force or through intimidation. You do it by having those traits and personal characteristics which allow the other person to engage with you and come to trust that you're going to do what you say you're going to do, you are who you say you are, and you will be there for them if they have a problem. And those things go above and beyond whatever pops up on the screens, whatever gets into the tests. These are the skills that the Sales Institute is imparting to all of you. And I think it's critically important, and we have been the enormous beneficiary, my company has been the enormous beneficiary of seeing those skills play out when your folks have joined us. So just reflect for a moment that if you learn how to start by understanding the other party, if you learn how to articulate a value proposition, and if you learn how to become that person which tends to engender trust in other people, you're way ahead, way ahead.
Earlier in your life, we're in the military. Tell us about that whole trajectory. How do you start there and end up being the CEO of a massive company?
You know, some would say in the Marines you never leave, so I'm just on inactive duty right
okay.
now. But yes, I had a parallel career in the Marines for 30 years while I was working in business as well. I had 8 years on active duty, and then 22 of those years overlapped with business at the end. What I've always told people is the military is an incredibly valuable experience in and of itself. And that's not to discount the dangers that apply in today's world. That's not to discount the fact that actual Marines get deployed to hostile environments, and there are casualties in those environments. But that is to say that the lessons and the life skills and what the military, and in particular the Marines, have taught me has translated into every aspect of my professional career. The idea of personal discipline, the idea of goal setting, the idea of teamwork, the idea of an analytical basis for what you do, the ability to formulate a plan, to execute that plan with logic and consistency, to communicate it to others in a team that depend on each other for their very survival if you're going to succeed. All of those skills, as you can appreciate, immediately dovetail and overlap in a much less hostile environment when we're trying to organize a sales campaign, we're trying to organize a startup entrepreneurial company, anything that requires group participation and group support. The skills that are taught in the military are supportive and overlapping for that. And in terms of those abilities to form relationships, in today's world still, there are lots of people in positions of power out there who either were in the military or who have children in the military, and where that connection is a very valuable personal connection with the people you're trying to relate to.
And so you leave the military, you go into sales. How did you begin your corporate career?
I left the military to join a family business. So blood is thicker than the mud, as they say in the song, right? But we had a family distribution business in New Jersey in the old days, started by my grandfather. And I left after 8 years of active duty with the Marines to go join that family business. One of the things that the Marines did for me, which was very nice, is I got the chance to go to law school while I was in the Marines on active duty, became a lawyer. And so when I got off active duty, it was much easier to go back and apply those skills at a legal capacity to the family business and bring new value to the business. So that was my entry point into the family business. Quickly converted to the business side because I found out selling and business and leadership in business was more fun than the law. And so I got involved in that and continued on that side. We ultimately ended up selling the family business, and that launched the balance of my career in wholesale distribution because I stayed with the company that bought the business and went on with them until they themselves were taken out in a hostile takeover. It was a British company at the time, and they were bought by a Dutch company. If you think the British don't get along with the Germans or the French, you should see how they get along with the Dutch. It wasn't a very good mix. So many of us on the British side of the house were in need of a new job, and that's where I wound up at Laird Plastics 18 years ago. So here we are.
And were you working in sales in those companies? And then tell us about your trajectory and the steps you went through and all of that.
One of the things I've always said about a successful wholesale distribution company is that everybody carries a rifle, meaning everybody is a salesperson in a wholesale distribution company, whether you're the president, whether you are a sales rep, whether you're the loading master in the dock out back. Everybody is involved in selling. So in that capacity, in a family business, I got involved making sales calls and forming relationships with our customers very early on. But then I quickly acceded to more leadership positions in that family business. And my connection with sales over the last 30 years has been organizing those executives who ran sales organizations, and I was ultimately responsible for all of the sales activity, of course, as a CEO, but working with sales managers directly to formulate sales plans, recruit salespeople, which is why I've spent so much time here at Florida State, and oversee it from that capacity. I didn't have too long, a couple of years in our family business where I was actually calling on customers as the accountable sales rep. found out that some others could probably do that even better than I could. So we got them in there doing it, and I evolved into the leadership roles that I've had.
What do you know because of your military background that maybe somebody else vying for a position like yours or trying to do work like yours maybe doesn't understand as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the military, in particular the Marine Corps, has left me with an approach to all challenges and problems in life that allows me to start with a better organizational approach, more discipline, more analysis, and just focus, and then translate the skills in leading other Marines to leading salespeople, executives, companies, and teams in the pursuit of what you're trying to do. It's a mindset that you bring to a leadership challenge. It's the way you relate to others. It's that servant leadership that the Marine Corps is so famous for that I learned and ingrained deeply. And I think that if there's one element that separates a military leader from many of today's civilian leaders, is that you become completely ingrained in the notion of servant leadership. You know, the troops come first, you come second. If they're cold, you better be cold. If they're hungry, you better be hungry. You exist to see to the care and the feeding and the discipline and the training of your troops. And so you bring that mindset to the civilian world where it often is not found in today's headlines that we read about.
Well, I'm not sure most people would even associate that necessarily with the military, right? We see in movies the boot camp scenario where it's this authoritarian, top-down, you do the thing because I said so, and if you don't do it, I'm gonna, heckle you and be really mean to you. So explain how you kind of gave us some examples about being cold, but what does that really look like?
No, that's a great point, Willie. I've often been asked by those in the business world, what's the purpose of boot camp? Why do you idiots go through that? Why, when I see these, examples of recruits being harassed and intimidated and so forth? And there's a very good reason for that, which was explained to me on the third day of OCS, because all of us felt pretty sorry for ourselves. You probably could have sold a bus ticket out of Quantico for about $10,000 cash in those days. It was a lot of money back in '75. But the drill instructor came in on the third day, and he said, ladies, sorry, but that's what he said, ladies, we cannot make this training tough enough. We can't make it tough enough to make you worthy of the responsibility that you've asked to receive. And that straightened everybody else out right there. The reason the training is so tough is that you can't be a good leader until you're a good follower. The reason the training is so tough is that the circumstances Marines get engaged in overseas require instant, coordinated, uniform response to a problem that everybody in the unit can trust what the other guy is going to do. And what you're really doing in boot camp is you are learning how to engage with others that you have never met before, to adapt that instant response, that coordinated response, that instinctual response to very, very challenging circumstances. And a lot of the harassment is the mental awareness that you have not attained that level of integration with your fellow Marines, with the circumstances, and they repeat that over and over again until you have a group which can instinctively operate without verbal communication, without visual contact, with changing circumstances, knowing and trusting that everybody is going to do their job the way you know they're going to do it so that you can count on what's going to happen. And it is that need for that sort of action which requires that the training be so discipline-oriented, so tough, so different from everything that I ever learned in the fraternity house. Imagine I went from Delta Upsilon to Quantico, Virginia in about 48 hours. That was a pretty abrupt change of environment. Right? But it was just that. And I look back on it and I say, I was president of my fraternity house. Well, how did we do that? Well, it was, mob rule, and it was, alleged democracy and votes that didn't mean anything, and, all those, because what were we doing? We were deciding on whether we're going to have chicken or steak for dinner. But if you're in the jungle at night, or you're in the desert at night, and there's no ability to communicate, and there's confusion everywhere and noise, and you've got to decide, what are we going to do? You got to know everybody's going to do what they're required to do. And so that training is oriented to getting group action, coordinated, being a good follower before you presume to be a good leader, and then understanding, because you have followed, what your troops are going through. How many sales managers, accede to that position, and they've never really been a successful field representative? In the Marine Corps, if you're going to presume to be a platoon leader, you have been a platoon follower for at least 11 weeks under the harshest of circumstances so that you understand what it is your troops are going to be dealing with, right? And so there is that thought to keep in mind for you future sales managers, that you've got to perfect your own ability. You've got to perfect your own understanding of the role before you can presume to lead others in the performance of that role.
A week or two ago, I told the students, almost, shooting from the hip, just thinking of something to say. And I said, sometimes I don't know that I trust a sales manager that, well, one, not just that they were a salesperson before, but that they were a struggling salesperson before, that they weren't the born salesperson that marches in and commands the room and everything goes their way and it seems like the plot's written around them, that they had to face a lot of the stuff that their reps are going to have to face. It kind of seems similar to what you're saying, right? I can't coach you through this unless I can be a little vulnerable and reveal that I've had these same struggles.
Yeah, I think that's an extremely valid point. And it's not to say that there isn't a sales manager out there that's successful that was not a sales rep, but that is to say the probability of being a successful sales manager, I think, is greatly enhanced if you have seen the struggles, understand the difficulties that the system presents your particular company or industry, understand the needs of the customers, and can coach and mentor those people you're responsible for from a position of knowledge and actually having done it rather than theory. And again, we get back to trusting people. And would you trust someone that's never done what they're presuming to tell you that they should do? Maybe. But obviously you appreciate that trust would be greatly enhanced if you say, boy, I sure know this he was out there for 3 years. He knows everything I'm seeing. So what he's telling me must be relevant. Right? So there is paying your dues aspect of this, which I think is what you're driving at, that as you drive towards ultimately sales management, don't forget to learn everything you can learn in the positions that you're going to hold first, because you're building blocks. You're building a house of knowledge and a house of experience which will serve you well when it comes your turn to run the house. Right?
So how specifically do you apply this idea of servant leadership in your organization, then moving away from the military examples?
Yeah, well, in North American Plastics, the whole company is oriented around a servant approach, right? We run on a profit share program where the senior leadership, the CEO, if you will, cannot earn a dime until the people out in the field have made it first. So therefore, my only incentive as the CEO was to help them be as successful as they could be. This is in my own enlightened self-interest, because without them being successful, I could not be successful myself. Right? So the company is structured through its profit share program, through its decentralized operations, for people to have authority, empowerment, and to be supported by leadership. Because if leaders go off and make their own initiatives or institute a program that others won't follow, it's going to thwart our being financially successful, and it's going to undermine my own ability to succeed as an individual in that organization. Right? So, we are clearly driving towards an environment where leaders have to understand that people beneath them first succeed, then people above them, in my role, say those leaders have to succeed first, and it builds backwards towards the last person to succeed in the company financially as the CEO. Mine was the last bonus, if you will, the last profit share payment to be determined. And I didn't have anything determined about my circumstances until every other employee had been attended to, either received a payment or had been justified as to why they would not receive a payment before I could get mine. And therefore, the whole approach that I took was that of helping those people be successful, because I knew that's the way the world worked. That's what servant leadership is. You devote yourself to others before yourself. You're invested in their success before your own. You apply your efforts to make them better rather than bring notoriety and accolades and attention to yourself.
I heard you once say, maybe a year or two ago, that leadership is a commitment. Can you explain that?
Yeah, in our company, when we train our young leaders, what I tell them is leadership is not a job, it's a lifestyle. Leadership is a 24/7 commitment to a certain way of living, a certain way of thinking, a certain responsibility that you have, whether or not you are behind your desk or anywhere else. And I think that's one of the key things that differentiates a servant leader from someone who looks at leadership as a job to be done for personal success. And I tell our folks, and as the Marines would have told me, you're not a Marine from 9 to 5. You are a Marine 24/7, 365. You represent the Marine Corps wherever you are, every hour of the day, all year long. And similarly, if you run a company, if you run a sales organization, if you're a leader in a business, that job, that responsibility doesn't end at 5 o'clock. If someone calls you at 9 o'clock that night, it's not as though you don't pick up the phone and put your hat back into the ring and say, what do we need to do to sort this out? You have to be prepared, ready, willing, and able to exercise both the responsibility and the authority of your role 24/7. And therefore, it is a lifestyle. If you don't think like a leader all the time, if you don't perfect the skills that leadership requires in everything you do, then you're detracting from your full development as a leader. And I've expressed to our people that you can't go home at night and kick the dog and come into the office the next morning and be as attentive, supportive, and committed to your people as you need to be. You can't go home and fight viciously with your spouse and then come in and say, now I'm going to be that person that my sales reps need me to be today in this leadership capacity. You have to just understand that it's a 24/7 commitment. And therefore, the personality traits, the behavioral traits, the appearance, the way you speak, the way you engage other people at all times should support the idea that you are, in fact, a leader. And that's what you need to be keeping in mind. And it is, as I say, a lifestyle rather than a job. Thank you.
Not in this class, but some classes I get students that, at the first day or two, I'm asking them, what do you want out of your career? What do you want out of your job? When you get this first job out of school, what are the big important things? And every now and then I'll get somebody that says, I'm really interested in work-life balance. I want to make sure that I'm not just one-sided. And there's a lot of reasons that might make sense, but the example you just gave, one of my reps calls at 9. So how does that, can we have a work-life balance? How does that jive?
Yeah, I think you can. And again, it's a 24/7 approach, right, to both work and to non-work. And it doesn't mean you can't have a social hour at 4 o'clock in the office one day, and you can't take your pack off for an hour and just engage each other on a more personal level during what might be viewed traditional work hours. You have to actively manage that balance that you're talking about. But again, what we've said in our company is if you are not happy personally, if your mental, moral, spiritual, or physical being is not in a good place, or if those same things of your loved ones is not in a good place, what kind of attitude, performance, and so forth will you be bringing into our company that day? The single mother whose child has 104 fever, but you say, get yourself into the office anyway, I'd expect you to be at your desk, you got a job to do. How much care, concern, and attentiveness is that person going to apply to our customers that day? This is not a question of trying to be altruistic and being a good guy, if you will. I think this is a very practical approach to recognize that human beings have a variety of needs. Maslow talked about it a long time ago, right? There's a variety and a hierarchy of needs that people have. And one of your jobs as a leader is to try to create the atmosphere, the culture, and the environment where as many of your people as possible can find the closest proximity to fulfillment on all those elements that are important to them. We had a young man that we hired out of the University of Washington a few years ago who happened to be the world, and I said that advisedly, the world junior two-man rowing champion. So this fellow was a German, and with another German high school student, they were the champions of the world in two-man crew a few years ago. So he was passionate about crew, as you can imagine. Well, he wanted to leave our office every day at 3:30 to go coach a local rowing club. Not every day, 3 days a week. He wanted to leave to go coach a local rowing club.
I'm a rounder. I call 3 days a week every day. That sounds like every day.
But 3 days seemed like every day, but it was 3 days a week, to be fair. So now what are your choices as a leader? You can say, Sebastian, that's not going to happen, man. It's 3:30. We're still open for business. You got people out there that depend on you. That's not going to happen. Well, if I had said that, what's he going to do? He's probably going to find another job. So would I have helped our company if I had said, you're going to be here at 3:30 whether you want to be or not? So what we talked about was what typically happened between 3:30 and 5:30 every day, and how do we cover that through his own initiative and efforts to minimize the impact of his being absent. And he devised his own alternate work plan and communication plan and found a way to get 97% of his stuff done so that neither of us had to have great angst because he wasn't there at 3:30. Right? There does have to be an accommodation to work-life balance these days. People aren't going to work if they're unhappy. And that's not to say that the inmates run the asylum. That's not to say you can work whenever you want. That's not to say everybody gets to work from home. That's not the balance that I'm talking about. But if you have a critical interest, if you have a critical need to be somewhere so that you're happier as a person, if I'm going to choose to hire you, I've got to be willing, I think, today to respond to what those circumstances are, to the best of our ability. Some situations maybe you just can't work out. But if you can, I think it's on the enlightened side of leadership to say you need to try to work that out.
We're going to stop it right there for now. Please dive into the next episode of the Sales Lab to hear the conclusion of this interview. By the way, if you like what you've heard so far, be sure to subscribe and rate the podcast on whatever app you use to listen. Also, share this with your colleagues and friends, and let's continue to have a deeper discussion on all things related to selling and sales leadership. See you next time in the Sales Lab.